Happy hello dear friends, I hope you are doing well. My name is Adi and welcome back to my YouTube channel. And today we are working on the architecture of Belmire, one of the towns in my work in progress story. I was gonna do the whole culture for this video, but I just really got fixated on the architecture. I got a little bit hyper-focused on it. So we are gonna do another video of Belmire in the next video after this one, where I will work on specific parts of the culture that isn't the fashion or the architecture of the town. But yeah, so today I am going to go over 3 key questions that I consider when I first approach the designing of an architecture for a town or a city or a village or anything really. And this second question and the third question, they could translate over into like general culture design as well. The first one not so much, but the second one and the third one definitely could. Before we start too, I also just want to say that you kind of need to consider all of these questions together as a group instead of kind of just considering them one at a time, because they kind of influence each other, and like what you pick for one question will kind of just influence what you can pick for this, like the next question, if that makes sense. But yeah. So the first question is, what materials are used? And this really just like, you have to consider what the community has access to and also consider the availability of the materials and the cost of the materials. This will heavily influence the overall look of the town, the city, whatever you are designing. And this would be also very dependent on the world that you're working with. For example, bluestone, also known as basalt, in real life is relatively cheap and pretty easy to get your hands on, but maybe for some reason in your world it's expensive and hard to find. So then depending on what town you're working with, it might be harder for that community to get that material. So consider what the materials in your world would be like that in that aspect. And also consider the socio-economic class of the town, village, or etc. Like if you're working with a low-class village, you're not likely to have expensive materials like marble or something like that. Unless there's some historical reason, like this does happen sometimes, like maybe this village, maybe there was a period in its history where some royalty lived there, so there's some expensive architecture or special buildings that have more expensive materials in it, you know? But yeah. So the next 2 questions can definitely transfer over to general culture designing. So the second question is, what's the color palette like? The color palette of any world building design is so important. Color speaks, okay? Just like in character design, the color palette of an architecture in a region will speak to its history, to its vibe, and will also talk about what the community that resides there is like. So like if you wanted a moody, spooky town, you would want to go with lots of blues and greys and maybe some like blacks in there. And keep in mind too that this will also influence what materials will be used. So that connects back to the first question, and you need to consider the availability of materials and the cost of materials. But you can obviously, as a world builder, you are the god of this world, so you can just make up materials that if you're working with a low-class village and you want it to be spooky and you need a blue or a grey, you can just make up a material that is cheap and they would have access to suit the story. Like, it's pretty easy to do that. But yeah, then if you wanted the town to appear happy and fun, you would consider using whites, reds, oranges, yellows, and you could even like add other colors in there too, like greens and maybe more playful blues instead of like moody blues. And this question obviously connects, well, not obviously because you don't know it yet, but this question connects to the next question, which is, what vibe do you want the architecture to give off? So this question is considering the style of architecture. In real life, there are hundreds, literal hundreds of architecture styles from across history, across the entire world, and each one will give off a different vibe. So you could go gothic or cozy or romantic or majestic or literally anything else that you could think of. And also, while considering this, you would need to consider your own culture and your audience's culture in real life. I'll explain. So for me, as an Australian who grew up with Western influences, if someone tells me to imagine a majestic building, I would probably imagine something like a European castle. But if I were from, say, an Asian country, like maybe Japan or maybe India, and someone told me to imagine a majestic building, I would probably not imagine a European castle. Does that make sense? So if you want this town or city in your world to give off a majestic vibe, the architecture style that you go with will depend on what culture you're being influenced by in real life. Or maybe your culture is Western, but the world you're building is inspired by Eastern culture. Then you would also have to consider if the character is in a town and thinks, wow, that's such a majestic building, and the story is inspired by Eastern culture, you would have to pick a majestic Eastern style of architecture to match up with the character and the story. Yeah. And another thing you want to consider with the style of the architecture is also how it's like there's like a scale of how simple it is and how ornate it is. So this also depends on the socioeconomic classes, the culture of the country, all the way down to the individual communities. You need to consider, is this a town that would be really ornate and be very decorative, or is this more of a simple town that isn't very decorative and is really just using the bare bones of what you need to have a building? But yeah, those were the 3 key questions that I consider when building an architecture style. Just like the first 3 ones that I think of immediately and go to first. And of course there are many other questions that you need to consider, and I could definitely come up with a longer list, but the length of this video just won't allow it. So let me know in the comments if you want to get more of these types of questions from me in the next video, where we will be designing other aspects of the culture of Belmire. I could come up with more architecture related questions, but I could also come up with more just general culture questions that you could use to help you with your own world building. So yeah, we're at the end of the video now. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's quite a short one actually, way shorter than my usual videos, especially recently. But yeah, comment your ideas or questions down below for the next video. And make sure you like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this. I would really appreciate it. Do all those good YouTube things. And yeah, that's pretty much everything. And that is pretty much everything for now. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you all have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you all next time. Bye!